Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome in. I'm going to give it just a minute to have everyone come in. We're so happy to have you this morning. Happy Thursday of April. It's beautiful outside. Put in the chat what your favorite spring flower is. Welcome to the Grand Rapids 2030 District webinar series. This is the, what is it now, guys? The third or fourth in the series. And of course, there's 6. We like nice numbers, but if you want something specific, let us know. You know that we always create something that you're looking for. We got a specific request for looking deep dive into electrification and carbon offsets. And so those sorts of things, hearing straight from our members is how we're able to get the content that you want. So thank you again for coming to the Grand Rapids 2030 District webinar series. This series is the E.H.Zero series for folks who want a little refresher. The E.H.Zero project is a combination of the City of Grand Rapids, the Urban Core Collective, the Grand Rapids 2030 District. We're combining ourselves to help figure out how to enable zero carbon programs and policies that will empower you folks to achieve science-based targets. So right now we're talking about what was an option from the Zero Cities project, which was point of sale, sustainable disclosures. Sustainable transactions. How can the energy and operational disclosure requirements for investors help drive future change? I want to thank Monika, Henn, director at the the Urban Land Institute, and Peter Skornia, president at Pisani Building Company, for joining us today. And just a reminder, the City of Grand Rapids, the Grand Rapids 2030 District, Urban Core Collective are 3 equal partners on this project. And we are thankful to the Wege Foundation as well as Kresge for our funding for this project. And for the Grand Rapids 2030 District visionary sponsors overall, DTE, Consumers Energy, Eagle, Wege, we're thankful for everything that they do to help us drive our mission forward. So quick agenda to get started, folks. Monika will start us off with sustainable transactions. Peter is a phenomenal local voice that will explain how sustainable transactions affect his decisions. And then after that Q&A, we're gonna have some questions lined up, and definitely put your questions in the chat. So a little what do you call them, housekeepings. There's the chat. Remember, when you're talking to just the panelists versus everybody, put your questions in the Q&A and we'll get a hold of them. And then after this webinar series, after this webinar, we will send you a survey, what you thought, what more you'd like to see. And if you ever have specific questions, you can message me directly. So Monika, thank you for coming today, all the way out for New York City. Could you take it away?
Sure, thanks, Gillian. I'm really excited to be here today. I really like this kind of tradition of putting some information about yourself in the chat box. So I'll just share while I'm getting my slides together that my favorite spring flowers are tulips. I saw someone else had that too, but I thought I'd add that in, another vote for tulips. So like Gillian said, I am Monika Henn. I'm a director at the ULI Greenprint Center. And just for a little bit of background, ULI stands for the Urban Land Institute. For those of you that don't know, that is a real estate focused nonprofit, and we're all about best practices in land use planning and development. And so we have a number of different research centers, and ULI Greenprint sits within it as an expert on sustainable real estate. We do a lot of research on this topic, and we also work with a community of practice. So kind of similar to the community that you guys have here in Western Michigan, we have a community of over 65 real estate owner and investor member companies that are really committed to improving the environmental performance of their real estate portfolios. And so those are global real estate portfolios down to kind of local and regional real estate portfolios. And then in addition, we do a lot of local technical assistance. So we have something called the Net Zero Imperative, and we are working with different communities and cities to try and help them address real estate specific challenges on their path towards decarbonization. So this is just a list of some of our Greenprint members. These are their logos, some large companies. I think, what's helpful to think about from this slide is just a lot of these companies have been leaders in sustainable real estate. And so a lot of the research and thought leadership that we put together is kind of from their expertise and a lot of interviews and just conversations with our members. So sustainable transactions, that's why we're here today. ULI released a report back in a few years ago on the topic of sustainable transactions. I think it's a really important topic in terms of how to, strategize about your portfolio long-term. If you're setting net zero goals, if you want to achieve net zero, thinking about how you bring assets into your portfolio and how you kind of address them when you're first purchasing, during the hold period, and then ultimately if you're planning to sell them at a later date. There's a lot of ways to consider energy efficiency and sustainability, and really add value to the building by considering those different things. So this report was published with support from View Inc., and it's based on 30 interviews, and put together, we kind of came up with 11 strategic opportunities during a real estate transaction. And so if you're interested in learning more, there's some great examples and other great kind of facts, I suppose, at uli.org/sustainable transactions. So I definitely encourage you to check that out and download the report. Even if you don't want to read a whole report, there's like a one-page infographic that gives, I think, the high-level overview that I'm going to do today. So I would also just add, like I said, incorporating these types of considerations during your sustainable transactions experience just is shown to add asset value and improve your operating income. So I would definitely encourage you to look into that. So I think first step, acquisitions and due diligence. You're bringing a building into your portfolio. There's a lot of groundwork that you can do to really set the stage for a successful and sustainable building. And the first one is to look at energy expenses and actual energy expenses, not just estimates that could be provided or, just by saying, oh, this building is LEED. Those are all great things. But, make sure you can get your hands on some real energy bills to think about, how is this building performing over time? Having those numbers will be really significant. And next is expanding the due diligence and property condition assessment to include some sustainability factors. And this is something that a lot of our Greenprint members and a lot of real estate organizations have started to incorporate. So, adding in questions, checking whether the building has a green building certification, or does it, if it doesn't, is there kind of an inexpensive way for it to achieve certification? Is there an opportunity for building commissioning? Has it been done before? Are there any reports that can kind of provide additional information on the technologies and their performance in the building? Are there cost recovery opportunities in the current lease structures? So, especially in office buildings, there can be a split incentive between the office building owner making investments in energy efficiency, but the tenant reaping a lot of the financial benefits. And so green lease clauses can be a real opportunity to kind of combine both the goals of the landlord and the tenant. So do they have green leases in place, or are there opportunities during renewal or other timeframes to add those in? Think about extreme weather models and long-term climate risks. So a lot of people definitely look at FEMA flood maps when they're purchasing a building, but there are more opportunities. Are there any sea level rise maps? Is there extreme heat? Is there drought in the area? Are there, other weather related risks to the building? It's not just about flooding from hurricanes, which probably isn't that relevant in Western Michigan, but I'm sure there are other climate risks to be considering. And then understanding a building's health status. So this report was actually released before COVID, but I think understanding a building's indoor air quality, how well ventilated it is, those are all things that are only exponentially more important at this point in time. So just having that data is going to be really helpful in figuring out, what's possible. And then I would also just say, what are some of the local green building standards in the area? And then how much is it going to cost for you to bring your building up to that standard? So, I was looking around, I see that Grand Rapids is part of the White House Building Performance Standards Coalition. And, that means that hopefully there will be some sort of building performance standard in the future. And so if that does happen to pass, like it has in other cities, then it'll be important to understand what kind of investment you'll need to make to bring it up to standards. Next bit, Probably a really important piece. I think this is where a lot of people kind of get stuck, is just making the money work in terms of financing the deal. So just thinking about big picture, big ticket items and project financing, and leveraging sustainability specific financing tools. I think I have another slide that goes into it a little deeper. So anytime you acquire an asset or make an upgrade, there's going to be some level of debt that you're taking on, right? But once that building is acquired, if you're looking at a 12 to 15% internal hurdle rate, and then with that debt, if you have to make an upgrade, you have to just spend additional capital. And so thinking about, when you're financing the project, making sure you're thinking about what kinds of large investments am I going to need to make, and underwrite that during the purchase time. In addition, there are a lot of financing vehicles that you can kind of search out that are sustainability specific, that are going to help you fund these particular types of investments. So that could be an energy services performance contract. There's CPACE financing, different green bond opportunities. So just figuring out what's available to you in your market and how you can leverage that in order to maybe you can't keep it on the balance sheet to make an investment in a boiler to make it more efficient, but you might be able to use this type of financing that isn't always on the balance sheet. And so it'll help you just kind of move capital around. Next is the hold period. So, this is also a really significant piece in terms of managing your building sustainably. So, tenants, they are using up to 50% or more of the energy in a building. And so how you engage with them, how you build out a space for them when they sign on a lease, those are really important, and they're going to have an impact on your costs, and also I think your relationship with your tenants. So building that early, having those conversations early to help both of you kind of be more efficient and save on utility costs is really important. So there are a number of opportunities here. So one is upgrading building systems in the right order and as soon as possible. So just thinking through, you don't want to necessarily make certain changes while the building is occupied. So is there an opportunity at tenant lease turnover to kind of make upgrades? Are certain pieces of equipment going to be out? What's that schedule in terms of, them just becoming or in need of a replacement? So thinking through that and having the financing in place for when those time periods come up. Next is attract tenants at a premium by featuring sustainability or health in leasing activities. So we've seen a lot of interest in sustainability features, whether that's for the lower utility costs, whether that's because an organization has their own sustainability goals that they're trying to meet and really, walk the talk that they're putting out there. And then health, people want to often bring people back into the office. And so if that's the case, being able to show that your building is healthy, has, great ventilation, all of those things is going to support faster lease up. Next is to leverage leases to align costs and benefits for landlord and tenant. And so, we kind of talked about this a little bit before, but if you are interested in specific green lease language, there is an organization or kind of a consortium called Green Lease Leaders. I would definitely encourage you to check out their library. They have a group, a kind of a set of different lease clauses that you can include that will help you with cost recovery, help you start those conversations with your tenant, even if it's just things like, making sure you can collect their tenant energy data, stuff like that. And then finally is guiding the tenant fit out process to maximize building performance. So, when a tenant moves in, their fit out is the best time to start engaging them on efficiency in their space. So making sure that there are LED lights that they bring in, if they're going to bring in appliances, are they Energy Star appliances? Helping them through that process and stuff like that can really help minimize their energy use and build a strong relationship with the tenant. And ULI has a tenant energy optimization program. I think it's tenantenergy.uli.org. And that process just kind of walks through, different considerations that you should be thinking about when building out a tenant space. And a number of building owners, have said that they can provide that to a tenant. and just say, these are some best practices to think about, which has been really helpful as well. This is just an example. So this is a 70,000 square foot office building in Seattle. It's not a new building. They have been occupying it for a while, but they underwent a window replacement. And they were able to reduce its energy consumption by 18% just with the window replacement. So about 40 cents per square foot. And then by making those improvements, it wasn't just that the windows were replaced and the energy consumed was lower. It was also that the tenants felt more comfortable in the space because the windows were a little tinted. So there was better temperature control. There were fewer complaints from the tenants. And they were able to renew existing tenants and lease 2 empty floors for $5 per square foot more than before the window replacements. So making these investments can have, a strong financial opportunity for you during the whole period as well. And then it also, after they put in the more efficient windows, then they were able to kind of downsize when the chiller was replaced. So the more efficient your building is, the smaller the equipment to heat and cool the facility. So that'll lower your costs at a later date as well. And so doing it sooner rather than later, considering these replacements in a hold period, just allows for optimal operational and maintenance savings, and then allows for you to kind of have those numbers to eventually show what the increased value you've added are. And then finally, preparing for disposition. So market the building to buyers who might pay a premium for sustainability or just be interested in purchasing sustainable real estate. There are a lot of organizations now in the real estate industry that are setting net zero goals. And so being able to say that, maybe your building's not net zero, but there's some opportunities for improvement. You found a number of them and made those investments. You're getting them part of the way there. That can be a really strong conversation. Find a qualified appraiser and use valuation guidance for sustainable buildings. This is definitely, I think, a challenge for the real estate industry is just, how are appraisers viewing and valuing these sustainable improvements? And I wouldn't say that it's perfect and that all the value is being captured at this point in time, but I think the appraisal industry is evolving and trying to incorporate and understand where that additional value is coming from, and having the numbers, having that energy data, just making sure that you have a strong set of energy performance benchmarks over time, I think really adds to their argument or their case to, increase that value for sustainability. And then finally, make any remaining big investments a year before disposition in order to capture value in the sales price. So it helps you have those numbers to show that there's the value. So, the year before disposition, we kind of talked about it, but just think about using the last year to 18 months to show the positive impact on NOI. So have those energy bills right into future cash flows of building, and then, just figure out how those numbers kind of work together. So a project with an 8-year payback and a 12% IRR turns into a project with a 1-year payback and an instant profit if you can make those numbers work. And so Host Hotels, it's a great example in the report. They've been able to be really smart about kind of leveraging some of their final year investments to have a faster payback for them, and then ultimately be a more desirable asset on the back end. So with that, hopefully that gives you some helpful kind of tools and techniques to think about. And I look forward to any Q&A. And with that, I will pass things over to Peter for his presentation.
Thank you, Monika. Yeah, there's some great stuff there. I was busily taking notes as you were going through your presentation. So thanks so much for that. I'm going to talk about this from a local aspect as a builder, Bazzani Building Company. First of all, I guess, excuse me, I'll introduce myself. I'm Peter Skornia with Bazzani Building Company. we're a builder here in Grand Rapids and a developer. So we do some of our work is for ourselves on development, and we've been focusing over the last couple of years now on carbon neutrality and a few qualifiers on that. What we've been doing in terms of certification is carbon neutrality for operations. So while we recognize we need to do a lot of work on tracking our carbon during the construction process, we got a long ways to go there. So when we say carbon neutral, this is for operations. Once we're done with the building, ongoing, and a lot of things that tie into what Monika was talking about. This really focuses on how much energy we're using and the type of energy. So with that, we've been converting our buildings to all electric, getting rid of natural gas. And let's see. How do I get my screen to move? A few things we're doing with that. We are a B Corp. We'll talk a little bit about that. A really important thing for us is being part of the Grand Rapids 2030 district. And a big reason why our projects have been successful is that they are in a community that values this, and in a community that's doing well, and a lot of people are moving to. So we don't have to build a lot of extra features into our buildings. And when I say buildings now, for the most part, we're talking about apartment buildings, residential buildings. That by being in the city, there's just a lot of cool stuff in Grand Rapids that we get the benefit of, and our tenants get the benefit of, that we don't have to include in the building itself. So the process that we go through is really evaluating what is our energy consumption going to be, what are the total greenhouse gas emissions of a building going to be, how do we reduce those, going through some relatively simple steps. First of all, building more energy efficient, all electric buildings, focusing on the thermal envelope. Monika talked about that a little bit, the example in Seattle there, replacing the windows. And that, I think, is just such a huge thing, certainly for a new building, but even with a renovation, you're finishing a renovation now, and spend a lot of time focusing on that of what are the existing exterior walls, what are the roof, what's the roof, what are our window connections, how can we improve that first, so that the HVAC system that we put in is going to operate a lot better. We focus on size a little bit. We're not doing tiny spaces, but right sizing them so we don't have a lot of extra space. Energy efficiency through electric heating, cooling, hot water systems. Smaller appliances or right-sized appliances. We're doing apartments for 1 and 2 people. They don't need a giant fridge. They don't need a full-size dishwasher. And then getting our electricity from renewable sources, and working a lot with our local utility here on that. Great if people can produce their own. A lot of great things happening, certainly with people doing their own solar. But if they can't, again, working with your local utility to get renewable energy directly from the grid. So we can get our emissions to close to zero. Whoops. But we're not going to get all the way to zero by those direct actions. So the final step that we go through is purchasing offsets. And that's our tracking metric. And the idea behind it is that the better we can do on the front end with reducing our emissions and then measuring them every year, actually keeping track of utility bills and things, keeping track of how much water we use, less offsets that we have to buy. And we don't have local offsets now in West Michigan, but even by buying them, we're contributing to an overall global goal of addressing our climate issues. So this is an example of a project we built. This was new construction that we did a little over a year ago. And it's great because now we've got a year's worth of data on it. And Monika, I can't support your position enough of actually keeping track of what your utility bills are and what they are for tenants. And we did the commissioning and energy model up front that told us about where we were going to be. And on average, that's where we ended up. And we're really pleased with that. And I think it's been a positive thing for our tenants. It's just a great way of tracking, and then a way to look and see, well, okay, what kinds of things can we do to improve from there? So for this we ended up with, there's 23 apartments in here, and our average electric bill, which includes all of their heating and cooling, is about $57 a month. That's really worked out well, and our tenants appreciate it. So some things we have in the building that tie into some of the features that we've been talking about. Having bicycle storage on site. If we're going to encourage people to use bikes, it's doable in the city. Have a place for them to store them. Having porches and patio units, Juliet balconies, getting people to appreciate fresh air and being able to get outside. The HVAC system we use is 100% fresh air. We talked a little bit about air quality. So we don't have any recirculation between units. And then some of this is more standard apartment building stuff, but having fiber optic to each, we have a lot of people working from home now, make sure they have good, fast internet, providing washer and dryer in the units. And then again, on location, we're walking distance with this project, as well as the new one we're doing here, to restaurants and entertainment and just things to do in the city. When we did this was just when COVID was becoming a regular part of all of our lives, and the HVAC system really helps with that, because we're not mixing that air, providing fresh air into the space. Our energy code still allows opening your window to get fresh air, which we don't discourage, but the reality is in February in Michigan, people aren't going to do that. And if the building was designed around that as a way to get fresh air into the space, you're not going to get it. So this is a relatively simple system now. They're becoming very popular energy recovery ventilators that run 24/7. They don't use a lot of energy, and they're constantly providing fresh air into the space. So we're putting these in all of our units now. Heating and cooling, we use the mini split heat pumps. These have been around for a long time. Relatively recently, they've made some improvements that make them efficient in cold weather climates. So we've had good luck with those, particularly in multifamily units. You really get a benefit of apartments stacked on top of each other and together in one building. Again, with a focus on the thermal envelope of the building, making sure that the insulation is done well, that the windows are sealed, that you've got good roof insulation. Otherwise, these things are working too hard to overcome faults in that. And our overall air distribution in the space. Of course, we have an exhaust fan for the bathroom that's exhausted straight out. But other than that, the ERV runs all of the time to provide our fresh air. The mini split just moves air around in the space and heats it and cools it. And for the bedrooms, for the size of our units, one mini split will handle the whole space. So we just put a fan in that moves air from the living area into the bedroom. And it's a cost-saving measure. And I bring that up just because the sustainability features overall do not need to add to a project cost. These are market rate apartments. We didn't get any special grants or funding to do a carbon neutral building. We just build it into the design. We use ventless dryers, and have overall had really good luck with them. We put a heater in each of the bathrooms as a space heater, as a backup, and also you don't have to keep the whole house at 74 degrees in the wintertime. You can have the space heater going in the bathroom when you first get up, and it keeps your towel warm. And we talked about the ventless dryer. So all of that being said, the most important design consideration that we have, and it gets to the overall marketability and value consideration of sustainability, is thinking about the tenants who are going to be in the building and make sure that they like it. Having an attractive exterior, desirable interior finishes, amenities like the bicycle storage, like porches and patios and things, and then having a healthy building, fresh air, no circulation between the units and such. And we talked about being a B Corp. The B Corp philosophy is around the triple bottom line of people, planet, and profit. We're a for-profit company. We're building market rate apartments. We have to be able to compete in that world. But as we do that, we really also want to think about the people that are going to be occupying the spaces. What can we do for our project that are going to make our tenants happy, that make them comfortable in their space? And then, of course, the planet is the sustainability features. And I'll touch just a little bit on offsets. For our carbon neutrality, again, we reduce our emissions as much as possible, track them, and then the last thing to get to a zero carbon is by purchasing offsets. We're doing some things in West Michigan, thanks to Gillian and Sherry and team, of getting us to a point where we can have local offsets. And as we get there, I think that's just a fantastic thing, because it creates this circle here locally of, boy, as people appreciate sustainability measures that are going into projects and will pay for them through the purchase of offsets. With those offsets being local, that money stays right in the local economy. And with that, I will stop sharing. And we'll turn it back over for Q&A.
Thank you, Peter. You are quite the popular person in the chat right here. Thank you, both of you, for phenomenal presentations, and thank you everybody in the chat for your questions. So just to reemphasize the point, so somebody was asking, okay, so your electric is 57, but what's your energy consumption? The electric is the energy consumption because it's a fully electric building. And folks are saying that I like the deckless units. And then regarding appliances, Peter, you mentioned all electric. So are you installing induction cook surfaces as well?
That's a great question. And the answer is no. And it's just right now, it's just come down to cost. It was in balancing all of those things, we just couldn't afford it. I've used them personally and I like them, but we haven't done it. I'm sure we will be in the future.
Yeah, literally last night, my father-in-law was talking about his new induction stove and how grandchild-proof it is. He kept saying.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I'm just trying to take a scan through the chat, folks. If one of the questions you asked in the chat has not been answered, please put in the Q&A so I can double check on that. So Peter, did you calculate the premium for this building compared to a typical code building? Is one of the questions that was asked.
Yeah, I didn't look at it as a premium. It was more of making decisions during during the design process.
Mhm.
So I think some of the things we did that would have been more expensive would be, we went a little higher on insulation on the exterior walls.
Mhm.
That was a factor. A little more insulation on the roof, but that's pretty inexpensive. But then actually with the HVAC system, which is really efficient, we don't have any ductwork. So that's a really cost-effective way to do
Yeah.
it. So tons of little details, but overall, we don't see it as a premium in our construction costs.
I love that answer. The devil, or I guess the angel, is in the details, isn't it?
Right, exactly.
So combining, Monika, your excellent presentation, and Peter, your local perspective. Again, folks, okay, Todd, thank you for that question. So trying to bring it full circle right here. Let's start with a why and then get into the nitty gritties. So bringing in, Monika, your full national perspective, you have your finger on the pulse of what are the trends that we're seeing around the US and the world. And Peter, you are the boots on the ground. You know exactly what it's like to try to walk the talk and talk the talk at the same time. So why is leveraging the performance of a building as a marketable sale point one of the most effective tools to future-proof our building stock? Bringing a full circle to why this project is even here in the first place. Peter, since you're off mute, I'll start with you and then I'll volley it over to Monika.
Yeah, I give a very, very simple answer. Excuse me, for me is data. Just being able to show, okay, here's a year's worth of data on the building through the landlord portal with our utility company without sharing anybody's private information. Just here's facts. So this is what it costs to operate the building. So that I think is so straightforward because nobody's going to question it, right? It's you can get into the details of how it worked and stuff, but I think the other features are how does it fit into our neighborhood, and this gets off on a tangent a little bit, but with changes in global warming, Monika said, boy, we don't have the hurricanes here. We don't have some of those issues. And people are seeing that, and people are moving to the Midwest, or people are moving to Michigan as a result of that. Lower cost of living here and some of those things as well from the coast. So how do we be thinking about a city that's growing? How are we thinking about increasing our urban density in a way that is still a great place to live?
Mm-hmm.
That's a little harder to measure. Those are a little bigger, maybe bigger picture things. But so simple answer to the question is having data, monitoring it, and then looking for ways to improve it.
Love it. Monika?
Yeah, so I mean, I think Peter is definitely right. Having the building performance is great data to have because it is just, it's not, there's no way to lie, like to hide how the building is performing. And I think it just provides such a clear view. I think if you make improvements, it's going to track how those improvements are showing up in your energy bill. So you have kind of like a record of how it's been improving over time. It can be compared against other buildings in the area. So if I'm looking against a few different buildings, energy bills, we just compare how buildings are using energy across those potential purchase buildings or units. And, you can kind of compare that information. And so I think just having that information is just probably one of the most powerful ways to understand, not just its impact environmentally, but also how it's performing financially in terms of, what's the net operating income? How can that be improved? How can I add value to my building by, making those efficiency improvements?
You mentioned net operating income, and earlier we talked about energy. So what metrics are best to leverage during these processes with sustainable transactions, and what are like the key ones to pay attention to when we're trying to pass buildings from hand to hand and operator to operator?
Yeah, so I mean, besides just the flat energy bills, I mean, I would also add in, information about water and waste is those
Mhm.
utility bills are just as important to consider because the prices of those are going up as well. And so any opportunities to kind of be more efficient and reduce those bills, very helpful. Net operating income, I think, is probably the biggest one. Just understanding, how much rent you're able to bring in. And so, how are you doing with tenants? Are you leasing the whole building? All of that. And then what are your expenses on the building? And so just kind of being able to find, what's the best way to reduce my operating expenses and maximize the income that's coming in.
Perfect. Yeah. And Peter, you have personal experience with figuring out how to do waste as well. Can you speak to that?
Sorry, with figuring out.
Waste, but yeah, your whole question, your whole answer, please.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, first on the NOI side, I think even though our tenants are responsible for paying their own utility bill, and it's removed from the NOI of a building operator, I think it's also important to the overall performance of the building, because it helps with keeping your tenants in the building longer. So your overall vacancy rate, keeping that as low as possible, that directly feeds into the NOI of a building.
Yeah, and that talks to the other like unforeseen co-benefits, you could say, about focusing on this sort of thing. Like maybe it's not necessarily the NOI, but the vacancy rate is lower, or you're able to maintain satisfaction longer, so you're having longer periods of folks staying in the building. And so there seems to be co-benefits that are incidental to these sorts of decisions. Are there other co-benefits that we haven't really listed yet that should be cited right now? We talked about tenant comfort. Are there more?
I think there are some benefits to going all electric. I think it is simpler. You have one utility bill. Well, you have water. You don't have a gas bill. So that's a little simpler. I think there's some safety benefits to that. I think there's some health benefits to not having, from a residential standpoint, of not having gas appliances. That feeds back into overall tenant happiness.
That's so true. Health is huge.
I think that, there's definitely a ton of tenant benefits in terms of comfort, reducing complaints, the amount of time that people spend, tweaking things for tenants. They can, those building engineers or building staff can spend time doing other things in your building. But I think another kind of co-benefit that we haven't talked too much about is around, what does being sustainable mean for your internal organization? And we found that a lot of companies are using their sustainability kind of credentials as a way to like get people in the door to work for them as a hiring metric. It's difficult to hire people in a lot of ways right now. And so, being able to say, hey, this is what we do on sustainability. This is really important to us. It can be a driver for bringing in some people who want to, work at a place that is impactful, that is having a positive impact on the environment, on the community, all of those things. And so I think that's a co-benefit that we don't always talk about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can just speak for my peers that they really are looking at that when they're looking for jobs right now. That's not fluffy at all. It's very tangible desire for folks, especially the newer generations. So the trends that we're seeing, the premiums that come with new construction is not seen as a premium for some folks, but seen as a premium for others. And we see that some areas of the country and some sectors of building management are really leading the way. So can we speak to the trends that we're seeing and what other sectors and groups stand to learn from this precedence? Let's start with Monika.
Sure. So, I mean, there's definitely a big trend for sustainable real estate on the coasts, I would say, definitely California and New York. I think that's driven in a number of ways. So, there's local regulations that are driving that. There are a lot of major, tenants that are driving sustainable real estate, because many of them are saying that they only want, X level of space. I mean, even the GSA has different leasing requirements for space. In terms of how sustainable it is. And so that's making people think harder about the sustainability of their buildings. And then if you have investors, a lot of investors are starting to ask more about your sustainability credentials. And so, obviously for a while that's been the case for European investors, but I think American investors are starting to get more active on the ESG front as well. And they're looking for companies to invest in that kind of align with that ethos. So I think big picture, we're kind of just seeing it disseminate out into the rest of the country as everyone makes their own business case work for them. So I think it's not, a lot of people, there could be higher upfront costs, but maybe you're not considering the long-term benefits that you're going to get from, you make that investment upfront, but it's going to pay back pretty quickly over time. And so being able to balance that, finding the right financing to support that. And then also, I think there's a lot of developers out there just being creative in terms of the design, like Peter was talking about, in terms of saying, he's building market rate units, they're doing well, but they're just being smart about how they're investing their capital and how they're designing their spaces, so they're not, they're as efficient as possible. So they need to buy, smaller equipment and more efficient equipment, and they're able to do that. And so just being aware of what incentives are out there, all of those things, it's a lot of things to think about. And sometimes it could be some additional just legwork on your part to understand what's out there and what is possible. But I think there's a lot of creativity in the space that people can leverage and learn from to help reduce those upfront costs and things and make people feel more comfortable about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I support that 100%. I think that's, you mentioned ESG, and I think that environmental, social, and governance measures can get glossed over a little bit, and I think it's worth talking about that. By having those, they have a real impact on the community, and by having that positive impact on the community, that's what makes market rate building work. If our rents weren't what they are in Grand Rapids now, we wouldn't be able to do new construction. We're just at that balance, right? And I think Grand Rapids is still an affordable city, but our rents have gone up quite a bit in the last 5 years. So how do we keep all of those things in balance? Having good school systems, having good parks, having, great beer for Grand Rapids, local amenities that make people want to move here, and they see it as a great place to live, then that drives a market that you can then afford to do new construction or renovate a building in such a way that that meets those needs. And maybe a quick shout out to the E.H.Zero program, which is trying to tie all of these things together to see how does that fit into our city and make our overall city better, not just the brand new construction or the larger companies, but it's also focused on the overall population of people in our community.
Couldn't agree more. And also the audience did catch that this is a market rate building and not with philanthropic dollars, anything like that. And that's a point we really want to drive home, and I think that's been successful so far, is that this is not the pie in the sky buildings. The cutting edge now has become the new wave, and now is turning into the new standard. And so we have to learn from each other. And this is why nonprofits like us exist, to be able to teach each other how to get here, and peer-to-peer learning, just like you, Peter, thank you for coming on, to help drive the needle or move the needle. And so we were talking about, like you mentioned earlier, Monika, BPS and transparency. We already have voluntary transparency through the Grand Rapids 2030 district. There's like talk about price and carbon, ESG transactions. And so there's a lot of pairing for why transparency of data in sustainable transactions pair with other things. We always say that, you know, you make the best decisions with information, the context you have in front of you, but when you have more information, you make different decisions. And so this will be able to, it's just opening the eyelids a little more to be able to see a fuller picture, to help make folks make different decisions during sustainable transactions. So Peter, if you could speak a little bit to how Monika was talking about, you know, the acquisitions and due diligence portion of sustainable transactions, and you've seen it play out for real in West Michigan. West Michigan is a unique context, and I feel that, thank you, Drew. I feel that folks would really like to hear from how this layers into your lived experience.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've had, I think experiences on both ends of this. Monika talked about the appraisal process, and we've had some negative experiences on the appraisal side, where buildings that are all electric were thought to be inefficient, or boy, why would you do that? It doesn't make any sense. Nobody else is doing that, and we were downgraded for it. On the other hand, we've had a lot of interest, and now in the projects as they come online, and we're starting to get data, we're getting a lot of interest in the building from people from out of state, people from the coasts and things, of seeing that, oh, you've got a building that's carbon neutral. You've got a building that is this much more energy efficient, or has these features. So from a developer standpoint, there's different ways of looking at it, right? Of whether it's a long-term hold, or selling a building so that you can do another one. That's kind of some of the stuff a small developer has to deal with. But I definitely see a turn now that people are paying attention. You know, we're not there on a regulatory space yet, but you look at a list of businesses that Monika showed in her early slide, BlackRock and Blackstone and big REITs. They are paying attention to this, and I think they're also showing that this is the direction we're going. We're gonna have to start to pay attention.
Monika?
Yeah, I mean, I think Peter is right. Not everybody understands, I think, yet. And I see that there's a question in the Q&A box that we've kind of touched on, but in terms of just like having people have enough information to choose sustainable buildings, or understand, you know, where there might be additional value in a more sustainable building than a less sustainable building. And, you know, I think that plays out in tenants. Are we giving them enough information? Like, how are we marketing this? How are people kind of talking about their sustainable building? All of that sort of thing. I mean, I think it's a lot of conversations. It's a lot of peer-to-peer learning, like this type of webinar, to kind of provide that information. And then also through some of the large kind of like appraisal certifying bodies, like whoever, you know, certifies them, getting guidance from them, getting into that kind of sphere and helping them understand that they need that information too, in order to be able to capture all that value. And so it's a lot of it's education, it's connecting with different groups. It's not enough to just be like, oh, well, developers, you know, obviously we want as many developers as possible to be doing this type of development, but it's, there's a broader spectrum of stakeholders in this process that we have to make sure we reach with this information as well. And so sharing those best practices, sharing examples, just helping people understand that there is a lot of value to capture here.
Absolutely. And it'd behoove me not to mention a shameless plug right now of that there is a business case for green buildings guide on the U.S. Green Building Council website that I'm sure one of my teammates will definitely put in the chat for. Thanks, Morgan. Perfect. So that's definitely a starter block to get you started. And ULI has tons of information on this too. Definitely lean into them as a resource as well. And actually, on that note, you folks, if folks were want to get to know your information better, or get to know you and where you stand better, how was the best way to get a hold of you or to get a hold of the content that you provide? Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, boy, for me, so we're a local business. I'll reinforce the of the triple bottom line for a for-profit company. Please reach out to us. We love talking about this stuff. Yeah. So go to my website. My contact information is there, as well as the rest of our team.
Mm-hmm.
And just looking at some of the stuff that's coming in the chat about water usage, about how are we doing hot water. I love those kinds of details, because that focuses in on some areas that we can improve, and there's definitely lots of room for incremental improvement on these on these projects. So yeah, please reach out.
And I dropped my email in the chat. So if you want to learn more, please feel free to email me. Otherwise, uli.org/greenprint. I can drop that in the chat as well. And there's some resources that we have put together on sustainable real estate that might be helpful.
Thank you. And let's close with a success story. Everyone loves a story. So, to tell us about a unique sustainable transaction that you've seen that really the folks on the call can learn from. Monika?
Interesting. I think I'll go, because I don't own buildings or real estate, I think what I will say, big picture, is that a success story for us has been, we heard from a large multifamily REIT. We were talking with them and we were like, oh, how did you hear about ULI Greenprint? All of these things. And it was through this sustainable transactions document. And, the CEO had read it. He was a ULI member, and then he just started passing it out to different people at the organization. Like, we should be thinking about this. We need to start implementing this into our work. And so, having people at private sector companies take this research that we put together and some of these best practices and figure out how it plays into their business and how they can, take that information and really imbue it into the work and the business that they're doing on a day-to-day basis. I think that's been a great success for us. And that's kind of our goal, is just to make sure that what we're putting out there is something that people are able to use and learn from and benefit from.
That's amazing.
All right. Mine will be much more local and personal, I guess. It's just a fun story to share, that we had somebody that was moving to Grand Rapids and took an interest in Bradford Station, the building that we were talking about there, because of the sustainability metrics and things. And they wanted to know if it was bikeable, and if there was a place to store their bike. And he did it. He moved in. He doesn't have a vehicle. He's able to live in the city. He's not. He can between public transportation and using his bike. And I love it, because we talk about this stuff so much, but it was a direct connection to here's an individual that's moving into our neighborhood, into our city, and actually doing this stuff.
Yeah, I absolutely hear you. And honestly, biking downtown to work is so much faster than trying to find parking. Let's be honest.
Hey.
Yeah. Hey, thank you so much, everyone, for your time. And thank you to the audience for joining us today, and Monika and Peter. Thank you, Julie. Thank you for volunteering your time today to speak with us. We're really grateful for your expertise. So again, folks, there'll be a follow-up chat. The slides and the recording will be sent to you along with a survey of what more you would like to see. So, oh, thank you, Wendy. I see that's in the chat right now. So don't be shy. We're your friends, and have a great day, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.